Sir, like with SR ma'am or with you, sir? Sir, which comes last it was?
Yeah, with SL ma'am.
Yeah, sir, we were doing like the properties of context-free languages with SR ma'am. Like
Okay.
we had done till that, and with you we did till converting a PDA into a CFG, the Greeback normal form. Those parts.
Okay. So in my class, I stopped with converting a PDA to a CFG, right? Using the GNF
Yes,
concept.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So having said that, um, yeah. So having said that, it seems that um, you were aware of certain problems called decidable problems, right? So did you come across certain decidable problems of context-free languages? Like if I ask whether two context-free languages are decidable, whether two context-free languages are equivalent or not. If I ask this question, what should be your answer? Hello, am I audible?
Sir, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if I ask you, um, given two context-free languages, please check whether these two languages are equivalent or not. What should be your answer? Now your answer should depend on certain concepts. Like I introduced certain terms, and I had been talking about these terms from many last classes. Decidability, right? So whether that particular problem of asking whether two context-free equivalent or not, then the answer would be either it's a decidable problem or it's an undecidable problem, right? Then if it's a decidable problem, then we have to formulate proofs and we have to justify that, okay, this is a decidable problem. And if it is not a decidable problem, then again we have to justify that it is not a decidable problem. So the very concept of decidability is directly to something, some machine or some model of computation that should be, in some sense, most generic and most powerful, and it should be able to um, map problems into certain new classes, right? So to start with, let me draw that age-old diagram that is key to this study of theory of computation. So I draw that age-old diagram that I have been drawing for so many days. So here we have at the core the regular languages, and we have the context-free languages. Now remember, in this portion, we also had we also talked about, when we talked about context-free languages, we talked about certain things here, right? And I am omitting those things here because we already had discussed. For example, here we had certain classes of languages that are of most practical use. Those were deterministic, like the LLK and the LRK languages, right? So this portion I am omitting for today's class, not to complicate things. So we have in the language hierarchy the regular languages, the context-free languages, and we define something called desirable languages. Now I change the course of discussion a bit. Now decidable languages, right? So obviously from this Venn diagram, if we say that this Venn diagram follows a proper subset relationship, it becomes obvious that that all regular language, all context-free languages in turn decidable, right? So that ignites a sense of power to you, that the languages that we are most interested in, that is the context-free languages um, as a whole, and its subclass regular languages are all decidable languages, right? There is a class of language under there is a class of language called, I introduce a new term, Turing recognizable. Right? And this is, in a sense, the class of all languages of discourse, right? And so it means that here we have certain languages that are not even Turing recognizable, right? So what we mean is all regular languages, context-free languages, all context-free languages are of course desirable. We are very happy. We should be very happy with this because mostly deterministic context-free languages um, that has the deterministic push-down automated machine of emulation. These languages are the actual language classes that language classes uh, and all computable things, all decidable things fall under this. So for sure, context-free language classes, all the context-free languages are decidable, right? So here you have languages that are not even Turing recognizable. So what I mean is there is something called there should be something that exists and that decides, right? So this portion is of utmost importance to us. That there should be a model of computation that is as generic as possible, that is as powerful as possible, that defines these three types of languages other than the context-free languages that we know to be decidable, right? Now, once I talk about decidability, I should be talking about the other names with which we can call we can talk about the same thing, such as decidability. What is decidability, right? So uh, so as you can see that the class of regular languages that are closed under the class of context free languages and that are decidable, by this diagram we say that are decidable. I simply mean that they are recursive. I can also mean that they are recursively computable. Now, if I find a definition that says that okay, computable means recursively computable, then I can also call decidable problems as computable problems, and I can also call them as solvable problems. Is a property is that is same as recursive, recursively computable, solvable. So you can see the language classes that we have already studied in the previous classes. That is the regular languages and the context-free languages. They are decidable by this picture, right? By the picture that we have drawn, these languages are decidable. That makes us happy because that immediately problems associated with classification of those languages are are computable, right? But there are certain problems that are not decidable. For example, I take a language from this context-free class L1. I take another language from this context-free class L2. So L1 and L2 are context-free languages. Context-free language L1 and context-free language L2, right? So even if context-free language L1 is decidable, that means if I talk about a string X and if I ask you whether that string X belongs to context-free language L1, this is a decidable problem. Y and ask you whether Y belongs to context-free language 2, this is also decidable. But if I ask whether context-free language L1 is equivalent to context-free language L2, that is not a decidable problem. Right? Now, with the concepts of PDA, you know how to test whether a string belongs to a language or not. How? For the proper derivation of a string using the rules of grammar of this context-free language, then you can say that this is decidable. it is always possible. If X really belongs here, it is always possible to create a parse tree for that. We can say that, okay, uh, this is not a member of this context free language. For that, you can go for exhaustive search. That may be tedious, or you can use some pumping lemmas to check whether it belongs here or not, whether this string is a context free, this string should be a member of a context free language or not. So individual checking of whether a string is a member of a, for example, you check whether X belongs to language L1, you check whether L belongs to language L2. See, these individual problems are decidable problems. But if you say that the whole language CFL1, whether it is equivalent to CFL2, that problem is not a problem, is a decidable problem or a non-decidable problem having defined decidability as recursively computable or simply computable or solvable. If we say with our general intuitions for all these terms, then there should be a model that only apply decidability in the most generic way. This language class of CFLs and regular languages, whether such problems are decidable or not, then you need a machine at a higher hierarchy that is more powerful than the PDA, and that should be as generic as possible to decide upon certain problems of all types. And that machine is called a Turing machine, right? Complicated machine, but uh, it is it is it is not, it's a new model of computation, but it's not that it's a very complicated machine, more complicated than the finite state machines. It's very complicated than push down automata. No, it's not such a complicated machine, but it does of enough of changes. Finite state machines or pushed on automata, it does enough changes in its definition so that it can work with these three types of uh, languages: decidable, Turing recognizable, and languages that are not Turing recognizable. So a Turing machine, we'll define a Turing machine shortly. We'll see how it changes to the machines that we had studied. For example, if I say that this is not very complicated than the finite state machine, so the main concept was it has a input tape, right? And there was a head that was only allowed to move right, was not allowed to move left. Right? Do you remember that this in case of finite state machine, DFS and NFS, you were only allowed to move right. So
Yes,
only
sir.
allowed to move right, read from the input, only allowed to read, change state and move right, right? Read a symbol, move right, and change state, or read a symbol and then change state and move right for the next symbol. There was finite state machine. Coupled with the finite state machine came a stack, and then we defined a PDA. Now remember, whenever we talk about PDA, essentially it's I automata, right? If you remember the concepts. So you had an input string, and you were allowed to scan a symbol, and then in conjunction with reading what is on the top of the stack, so with the both the input and the stack, you decide changes state or not. Whatever you do, you can only move right. So these two things are same here. The only thing is that you had more power because you had the stack. Now, with very little change in Turing machines, we can we can achieve marvels, right? So the concept says that here also you have a finite control, and you have a input head that should be scanning a symbol, and I add two more things to those were allowed for a finite state machine and a PDA, and I add can I can I can I can change a symbol that I read. Change a symbol that I read. That means overwrite. Writing. I can overwrite a symbol. So I see a A. I was in state Q. Now I want to go to some state B by overwriting A and converting A to a B. Got my point? So change a symbol. That was words power. So you have the power to change a symbol. Not only that, you have the power to change the symbol again. You can remain stationary. The head may remain stationary. And again in P, you can change B to C. Or you can move right as usual. This was allowed. And scan the next symbol, let it be D, and do the same thing there in state P. You do the same thing there. You are allowed to change the symbol that you read. You can move right, or you can move left, or you can remain stationary. So that means the power of the stack becomes inherent with these movements. So you are allowed to move left. So
Sir,
you are allowed to change the symbol. Plus, you are allowed to move left. Yeah, 1 minute, please. You are allowed to remain stationary. You are allowed to move right, and then change the state. Yes, carry on.
sir, no, sir. I was only actually asking that only, sir. That left, right, one thing, sir. Like, can
Left,
you also
right,
move?
one what?
Sir,
What?
actually, I was confused, sir, whether we could also move left and right, sir. But clear it in the next line only, sir.
Yeah. So left, right, and stationary. So if you allow the head to move left, right, or remain stationary, and if you allow to change a symbol, do you have a feeling that you are actually emulating the stack power within the tape only, right? Agreed or not? Not only that, you are emulating the stack power, you are emulating multiple controls on multiple stack at the same time. So that little change makes this model of computation the most generic model of computation in its most acceptable form. And with this change, it can define certain language classes that I was talking about. It can decide certain languages. Um, it can define certain languages to be decidable with its power, right? It can define certain languages to be Turing recognizable, and it can define certain language to be not Turing recognizable also. Now, everybody agrees or not? Everybody agrees or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So if
Yes,
I
sir.
if I go for, yeah, so it is very simple, right? So let us take things very simply. So what we have done is we have understood the capabilities of a finite state machine. We noted down the capabilities like capability 1 and capability 2. We noted the capability of the PDA, the same capabilities, only you have an added power of stack, and we add two more capabilities, right? What are the capabilities? That the head may remain stationary, it may move right, it may move left, and the finite control program may change the symbol that it is saying. So these two changes gives the machine immense power. I feel that in the chronology of historical development of theory of computing, this came first, and then people went on developing this, and then people went on developing this, right? Do we have a yes or no?
Yes, sir.
But it is exactly the opposite. That's the twist of the story. Now, to explain why exactly what I mean by exactly the opposite is, I need a special class on some historical perspectives. Of course, those historical perspectives I will deal with mathematical and tech. I will show you that this model of computation we owe to Alan Turing. You have heard his name, right? Alan Matheson Turing, and
Yes, sir.
he is known as the father of computation, because he came up with this generic model of computation and defined that, okay, if we have this model of computation, we can tackle with all the language classes possible, especially these language classes, and we can do computation also. So the added to the problem of languages, the problem related to languages, like whether a language is decidable or not, whether a language is computable or not. Added to that, a Turing machine was the first model of acceptable computation that said that it can compute a function. So apart from deciding on languages, it can compute functions, right? And that was the first accepted model of computation in the community of computer science, 1930s, 1939 or sometime. And then people went on find problems. For example, people tried to find out models that would that problem of programming languages. That means you should be having a deterministic way of defining alphabet, your programming language grammar, right? And so people develop PDAs and people develop finite state machines. You have already seen finite state machines applications in your last semester, right? In your circuit design. So for simpler tasks, people came up in the reverse chronology, and this happened around 1960s mid, right? But it seemed, as I started the class and as we started studying the subject, it seemed that this came first and this came second and this came third. But this is just the opposite. And to explain the opposite nature, that is not very intuitive. Our intuition says that this was the development, right? And to show that, I need a class on Thursday, nearly 1.5 hour class, and then I can discuss on how pure mathematics had its problem. Pure maths had its problem of defining a function. What we mean by a computable function? They came up with the definition of recursiveness, recursive functions as a way of defining functions that can cause a paradigm shift, and people were in search of a more generic model of computing functions, and 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 the model of recursive functions from pure mathematics part of contribution in 1900s was was not taking into consideration certain aspects of computability. And then Turing Turing machine. And before Turing, there was another research going on, carried on by Church, who was Turing's guide, and he talked something about lambda calculus. And later on, they proved that both these models are equivalent. And then from Turing, another model of computation, equivalent model of computation came up, grammar definitions. And this is how it happened, right? And then after Turing machine was well accepted in the research community, then people tried to find out easier models of computation, more deterministic models of computation with less complexity, and people came out with PDAs and finite automatons. to understand this whole chronology, I will take a extra class. But today's class, let us concentrate on Turing machine model say. I repeat once more, the Turing machine model says that you have an input tape, you have a finite control. That is what you have. Now the finite control looks exactly the same, like you define finite control in case of finite state machines and push down automata. A finite controls the way the head moves and what is being done in the position. So you have three extra movements in fact. The head may remain stationary, the head may move right, the head may move left. So you are scanning a symbol A, you are scanning a symbol A, you are in some state Q, you are scanning a symbol A, right? Now you are deciding a state P, and you are planning to overwrite A with a B, and you are deciding to move right, for example. So this is what you are doing actually. This is your del. See, I came up with the definition of del with the most generic automata and PDS. Agreed? Yes or no? So you are in some state Q, you are scanning a symbol A, you are scanning a symbol A. Now you decide to overwrite symbol A by B, A by a symbol B. This is this. You decide to change state from Q to P. So this may have three options, right? Move left, remain stationary, or move right. Yes or no?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So with the traditional diagram that we use to define finite state automata moves, we started with a state Q, we landed up in a state P. In case of finite or we were scanning a single symbol and a stack symbol. And what in case of Turing machine? Input symbol, then overwriting the input symbol that I scan, and I can move left, remain stationary. Move maybe to lessen the complexity in this pictorial description, maybe move left. So this is the symbol that you read. This represents a symbol that you write. Now let us talk about reading and writing, right? In pure computing terms. And this is a symbol, direction of head movement. Right? Okay, yes or no? So as usual, in case of everybody agrees with this, right? So so let us come back to define del, right? So before we define del, we can write down the tuple representation of this machine. What should be the tuple representation of this machine? Anybody? How can we represent this machine? One way of representing this machine is there should be a finite set of states. There should be an alphabet, obviously, because we are always dealing with strings. There should be a tape alphabet as well, right? Alphabet means the real strings. Example, tape alphabet means including zero. You may use a blank, you may use a dollar, you may use certain other, but a finite number of symbols, right? To to denote something else, to denote to for example, what I what I can say is uh, the Turing machine begins with the initial configuration as usual with other machines, and the initial string that we are going to work with ends here, and after that, the tape is filled up with blanks, and the tape is infinite towards the right. sorry, I forgot to tell this very important thing, that added to added to these two capabilities added to these two capabilities that you can change the symbol, you can change the symbol that you write. 1 minute please. Yes, added to these two capabilities that the head may move, remain stationary, move left or move right, you can change the symbol. Added to this, the tape is infinite. Tape is infinite towards the right. This is another that gives the machine such enormous power. I thought it would be obvious, so maybe I skipped. So, to for example, the initial configuration of the machine may be holding a string in this portion. So the machine can directly, for example, the machine can directly try to measure the length of a string, right? So this is a string that has been presented to the machine. Now to measure the string, if this is a problem, it should and go to a blank to say exhausted here, given the condition that there should not be a blank in between the input string that is presented. So a blank is, so you can say that a blank is a special symbol, like we use dollar in case of PDS, right? So you have as usual tau or a gamma, then you should be having a del. I have already described a del. Such simply, such simplicity, right? Del looks like the same. You have a start state, you have an accept state, right? This can be one definition, and we can have a reject state also. Now, why I build a tuple with a reject is just a theoretical model, but you can also have a model of Turing machine without this reject state. You can just say that okay, I have Q as a set of states. I have I have a set of states. I have a set of input symbols. I have a set of tape symbols. I have a special symbol called blank. Sorry, I should be writing a blank also. Um, and if you include blank in del, there should be an initial state and there should be an accept state. So you can also have a definition like this in some books. This is the tuple. But I would prefer to have a reject state also, because with the Turing machine, other than designing a dumb machine and showing some examples, I find it more responsible on my part to design the Turing machine and talk about Turing machine in the sense of actually uh, I should be talking about how to tackle these language classes, like the like decidable languages, Turing recognizable languages, and non-Turing recognizable languages. So without any loss of originality, I like to keep Q reject as another dedicated state to reject, right? But often that may be in for example, you don't have from a state, automatically it means that it should be going to some reject state. But to enumerate the machine to its full with its full description, I prefer to have this state, right? It doesn't matter. So in case of Turing machines, you will find, so just to continue, in case of Turing machines, you may find several definitions in several books. For example, you may have one definition like this in one book. That definition may be like this: Q, sigma, tau, del. They may be because blank is a very important symbol, because the input tape is infinite towards the end. So the first half of the tape should be input sequence string, and the rest should be filled up with a blank. So blank is a very important symbol. So they prefer to keep blank a special symbol. They want to keep it they want to give it a special place in this tuple definition, and they say that okay, this may be one definition you can find in one book, and you may find in some other book like this, q sigma tau del. Since tau contains blank, I'm not writing blank. Q0, q accept, and q reject, right? It doesn't matter. I will show you. Also, there are just to connect to whatever I'm saying. There are many different models of Turing machines also, right? There are many different models of Turing machines also, like a single tape Turing machine. The tape is locked on the left. It is locked on the left, but it is infinite towards the right. It has cells. You fill up the input string from the left to a position, say P. This is the input string. The head should be reading the first symbol of a Turing machine, a single tape. This is called a single tape Turing machine. Also, you may have a Turing machine with multiple tapes. So you have a finite control, finite movement for the tape 1. It has another tape for the tape 3, right? The way I define del, the essentially I am talking about the deterministic version of this machine. As usual, you may have a non-deterministic version of the machine. Then del should be you read a symbol A, and then you go to the power set notation. We having something like this. Now this is not a proper way to write, right? So we'll write q cross tau, tape alphabet, is going to 2 to the power q cross tau cross m. What is m? The head movement. It may be right, m may be a right movement, m may be a left movement, or m may be stationary. Raise it to the power 2, I essentially mean that I am putting in non-determinism. But here we'll discuss in many more classes to come. We'll discuss that a single tape Turing machine is essentially same in power as a multi-tape Turing machine, and a deterministic Turing machine is having same power as the non-deterministic Turing machine. So if we recollect things, we have seen that the non-deterministic finite automata has equivalent power with the deterministic finite automata. Here we see the deterministic Turing machine we'll see in future that deterministic Turing machine has having same power as the non-deterministic Turing machine. Only we had a change in the PDA case, and in case of PDAs, we have seen that deterministic PDA is less powerful than a non-deterministic one, right? I hope you remember. So here you can have many definitions of Turing machines, and I can, if time permits, I can talk about specific theoretical theorems that Turing came up with that he proved that all these versions of Turing machines are essentially of same power. That means whatever seems possible to you with 3 tapes is also very possible with a single tape. So if you have designed a solution to a problem with 3 tapes, you suddenly for example, you suddenly find that I require minimum 3 tapes and 3 independent head movements to solve this problem. Then I can apply certain theorem and proof and say that, okay, applying that proof, I can convert your necessity of using 3 different tapes with 3 different independent head movements to a single tape machine, right? So essentially these are all same. If we have defined del for a single tape Turing machine like this, so how did you define del for a single tape Turing machine? Del for a single tape Turing machine, how did you define just now? Q cross tau was taking you to tau cross movement, right? Right? This movement is nothing but,
Yes.
it may be a left movement, it may be a stationary movement, it may be a right movement, right? So I delete this Now this, if this is the del of a single tape Turing machine, what should be the del for a multi-tape Turing machine? Can we say that? Okay, multi-tape Turing machine, let you have k number of tapes. Let you have k number of tapes. This is one tape, this is second tape, and this is the kth tapes. Here k is 3. So what should be the generic del? Pretty simple. So you are in some state q, and you need to act on k different tape alphabets. I raise tau to the power k, and then I say that I change a state from state small q to p, so I keep q here in the most general case. And okay, for each such tape I can have 3 different movements. I can go left, I can be stationary, I can go right. For this tape I can go left, I can remain stationary, I can move right, I can move right, for example here, right? So what I do is I take this tau cross movement and raise it to the power k. Got my point? Now, does that satisfy your thirst? If this is a del of such a Turing machine, which is single tape Turing machine, I can very easily define a k tape Turing machine like this, where I have k tape, sorry, k number of tapes and k number of tape and movement patterns. Of course, deterministic part. And for the non-deterministic part, I can say that, okay, I need to introduce a power set notation. This stylish P, I write like something like this. So as soon as I denote this with the power notation means nothing. Taking this and making this to be a power of 2, right? So immediately this becomes non-deterministic version. Let us talk about deterministic version quite a bit, and then we'll go to non-deterministic. Right? So here k tape Turing machine means here how do you in some state q, you are in this position in tape number 1 scanning a, you are in this position of tape number 2 scanning a symbol b, and you are in this position in tape number 3 scanning a symbol c. Now you p, and in doing so, before doing so, you decide that my head of tape 3 should be going left, my head of tape 2 should be going right, and my head of it was, I would rewrite the symbol of, I would rewrite the symbol that I was scanning in tape 1, that is A, I would rewrite that with a B. I would rewrite the tape symbol that I was reading in tape 2, that is B, I would rewrite that with a A, and I would rewrite this with a A also. What does that mean? It essentially means you are deciding on tau cross movements total to the power k. Yes, 3 different moves. Move left for the third tape, move right for the second tape, move remain there for the first tape, and 3 different symbols are changed. So for 3 different symbols changed, tau cross m, the movement pattern raised to the power k. Right? So if I write something like q cross tau to the power k, that means I have a vector of symbols a, b, c that I started with. In, for example, if k is 3 tapes, the example, the symbols were a, b, and c. So this is a vector, and then you change state, that should also belong to q, and then for each tape symbol, if you, so tau cross, I can even elaborate or right. I am elaborating this m here with this sequence, and I raise it to the power k. Why? To have such a vector, like what it should have, it should have that this A, for example, maybe getting changed to a B, and then the head is remaining stationary, right? This B was getting changed to a C, and the head was moving right for the second step, and this C was getting changed to a and the head was moving left for the third step, if you remember. So Q cross this. That's why it is raised to the power T. So you started with ABC, right? If you remember the example, you started with here, you started with ABC, you started with ABC. Then for the first step, you decided to remain stationary, and to change that symbol, you also decided to change that symbol to B, right? Similarly, you change this symbol to C, and you change this symbol to A, and for the second step you decide to move right, and for the third step you decide to move left. So you started with A, B, C on one, this B was on tape 2, and C was, that I mean that A was on tape 2, I mean the head of tape 1 was on A, right? The head of tape 2 was on B, the head of tape 3 was on C. And here, what I was in state Q. So this was the configuration of the machine. Now I decide to change state to a state P. So I write the state name P, and A to a B and remain stationary. I want to change this B to a C and move right, and I want to change this C to. This is how you can define the K-tape Turing machine. But interestingly, all these Turing machine definitions you can find in many books are essentially the same as far as power of recognition is concerned. Yes, yes or no? Now, generally, I'm talking about a Turing machine as a general model of computation, and in the next class, I will talk about next. I don't know whether how far I can go. Next class maybe I'll talk about why this was widely accepted as model, as the most generic model of computation. How using this model of computation it was possible to define an algorithm, how using this model of computation it was possible for us to define um, uh, formulas like to define theorems like reducibility and many things, right? So now let us come back to that tuple. Let me change the board because it has started hanging before it hangs. So let us come back to this point, why I choose to define the Turing machine as Q cross sigma cross tau del Q0 Q accept and Q reject. Why I choose to have a reject state also. Now the story begins with considering how to present the Turing machine to you, and I would. One is, with the Turing machine, it is possible to have answers to some decidable problems, decidable class of languages, uh, class of languages, and um, class of languages that are not Turing recognizable, right? And also, I to show you Turing machines as problem solvers. So it can, for example, solve problems. For example, it can compute a plus b, right? It can compute A star B, problem solvers. So Turing machine as a computable model. Here, Turing machine as a decider or a recognizer of class of language. Before going into the justification of having a reject state, I think it is more tell you what exactly I mean by when I talk about decidable classes, Turing recognizing classes. Now, having defined the Turing machine model and accepting the fact that it is the most generic model of computation, by decidable languages, we mean that when we present a string as input to a Turing machine, we present a string as W as input to our Turing machine, string W as input to the Turing machine. The Turing machine should always halt. The Turing machine should always halt. What is halting? Uh, by what do I mean? What do I mean by this? That Turing machine should always halt. That means the Turing machine should always either it should not be confused. It either accepts and stops or rejects and stops. That is the interpretation of always halts. Got my point? So halting means you present a string W as input to a Turing machine. For all such strings W for which a generic model of Turing machine halts, all such strings define all such strings uh, that language is mean is if I say it in another way, that given a string as an input, the Turing machine will always halt. It means that the Turing machine will accept if W. So if W is an element of that particular language, the Turing machine will accept via state and halt. That means and stop. If W is not a member of L, then also the Turing machine will deterministically say that this is not a member of L. It will reject via Q reject and halt. So halting in a sense, it gives you a sense that in finite time it decides. It decides in finite time. So if you ask whether W is an element of L or not, it checks whether W belongs to L or not and accepts if really W belongs to L, and if it can also say that no, this W doesn't belong to L. Now, for all those class of languages where all those class of languages L for which a Turing machine always deterministically says that okay, I can check whether a string belongs to you or not, for all those classes of languages are called decidable languages, right? And as we have seen from the language onion, we have seen that regular languages, we have the context free languages, and then I strategically put decidable languages. That means the context free languages and regular languages are all decidable languages, right? That means if I give a string and I belongs to a context free language or not, that yes, if it belongs, and also it is capable of saying no if it doesn't belong. So it decides of telling a yes or a no in a finite time. That means polynomial time, right? That is what I mean by decidable languages, decidable class of languages. So Turing machine as a decider. Now Turing recognizable. Now this is another class of languages that says that that if really that string W is a member of the language L that is presented to the Turing machine, if if really W is a member of L, Turing machine always accepts and halts. However, if W is not a member of L, there is no guarantee that the Turing machine will always reject and halt. No guarantee that the Turing machine will always reject and halt. If it belongs to L, really if this belongs to L, the Turing machine will accept and halt. Got my point? But belong to L, and I have given the Turing machine to check whether this string belongs to L or not. And if really this doesn't belong to L, then the Turing machine will always reject and halt is not guaranteed. These class of languages are called Turing recognizable. So the Turing machine, Turing recognizable languages. So the Turing machine recognizes if it exists, it doesn't exist. So Turing recognizable languages, right? But there are also other languages that are not good languages. That I say not good, I mean that is not good for computation. That are not even Turing recognizable. So even if W is a member of L, that the Turing machine always accepts and halts is not guaranteed. And also, if W is not a member, to check whether W is a member of L, knowing that it is not guaranteed to reject, and again there is no guarantee that it would reject and halt. So these are called languages that are not even Turing recognizable. So as it seems, if I turn my attention to the first class that I started with, I gave enough importance on recursiveness, right? So coming with that, recursiveness has something to do with solvability. So we say that a Turing machine is a model that is capable of deciding whether a string is a member of a language or not in polynomial time. That means in finite time. That is, it will either accept if it is in L or reject if it is not in L. So that means these type of languages can also be called recursively computable, recursive or solvable. The class of languages recognizable, that means the Turing machine can recognize if it is a member of L, but it cannot surely or with guarantee it cannot say that it is not in L. Those languages are called Turing recognizable languages, and also they are known as partially decidable languages. It only decides partially, right? Semi-decidable languages or recursively enumerable languages. Recursively enumerable languages, RE, right? And the languages that are not guaranteed to the languages, for example, any language who if I check whether a string belongs to that languages or not, if I know that this string belongs to the language, even then Turing machine member of L, and that also cannot be guaranteed by a Turing machine. If that is the case, then these languages are called not Turing recognizable languages, not RE, right? Not RE. RE is recursively enumerable. So if I draw the Venn diagram again, the language class looks like this. So this is the discourse. So this is not even RE. These are very bad languages for computation. Not even RE. Okay. Then you have language classes, that is Turing recognizable. Then we are interested in this decidable class. We are very happy with this decidable class of languages, also called recursive, also called solvable, also called computable. We are very happy with this area, right? And falls within this area and the regular languages. Sorry, CFLs. I should be writing L. I am talking about languages, not grammars. Okay, so this is the picture, right? And if I zoom in here, I can say that, okay, let us look here. We have the regular languages. Then we have The deterministically solvable class of languages very handy to us for computation purposes. For example, for building compilers, for building parsers, LLK and LRK, they are all deterministically solvable problems, right? So I draw a class here and I say unambiguous. I label this class as deterministically solvable. The machine is deterministic push down automata, and then I can draw the CFG. That means a CFG can be ambiguous also, right? And here we had defined non-deterministic. So from this hierarchy itself, it is quite obvious that the deterministic push down automata is less capable than the non-deterministic one. And then what I can do is I choose to draw something like this: decidable. Remember, here I talked about deterministically solvable, deterministically decidable, right? And here I talk about general decidability. That means it includes non-determinism. And then you have, so this, take a zoom of this portion. This is how it looks. Okay, so let us end today. Too much of burden may be bad for you. Better you go through books and try to ask yourself questions and come up with questions, so that if you have, see, these are very conceptual things, so if you have any conceptual gap, it may be harmful for you, right? Okay, and as usual I will send yes, any questions you have?
Sir, actually, I kind of still confused about that the after the decidability part, sir. Like,
Yes.
if you are rejecting it, how are we not sure that it's not a Turing language? Like, I don't get the middle ground.
Which one?
Sir, sir, it's written that if we if W is not a part of
Okay,
L.
let me take a fresh board and let me do things again, right? That will be better.
Yes.
So, decidability. Now, suddenly my pen's thickness has become, it's not working. Decidable languages. So, let me write decidable languages. Decidable languages, also known as recursive, right?
Yeah. Computable.
Solvable, right? Now, why do we call them recursive, computable, solvable? Recursive because it has been seen that if there is a recursive definition of a problem, of a function, it, if it is possible for you, then since the recursion starts at the core, and you are sure that if it fails somewhere in between, the whole process can be termed as a failure. That guarantee, recursion gives that guarantee. If you remember, when I was discussing tail hat, right? So I talked
Yes.
about this. So decidable term is a very well associated with Turing machine model that acts as a decider. Now, what decision it takes? It takes a decision whether W is an element of language or not. That decision may be yes, W is an element of L, or it may be that no, W is not an element of L, right? Only two decisions.
Yes, sir.
So if the Turing machine can decide whether W is of a given language L or not, and if it can decide in finite time, if it is not confused, if W is a member of L, it says yes. If W is not a member of L, it says no.
Yes, sir.
For for all such languages L for which a Turing machine can say that okay, a string, if a string belongs to that language L, or if a string doesn't belong to this language L, it can deterministically say no. For all class of languages for which a Turing machine can say like this, those languages are called decidable languages. That means obviously there should be other languages for which the Turing machine cannot say like this, right? Those languages are further characterized as Turing recognizable languages. And in case of Turing recognizable languages, if W is a member of L, then the Turing machine deterministically says that okay, yes, it is a member of L. If you ask, is W a member of L? Not a member of L, the machine may loop and forget to reject. It may come towards rejection, but it may start looping again. So it cannot deterministically say that no, all those language classes for which a Turing machine can say yes if a string belongs to that language, but if a string doesn't belong, thus the Turing machine loops and deterministically cannot say no. Those languages are called Turing recognizable because it recognizes if yes, but cannot decide if no. Got my point? Yes?
Yes, sir. Now
Yes. Now got it. Yes. So
yes, sir.
also it means, yeah, whenever I talk about decidable problems, obviously I talk about something that is semi-decidable, and I should be talking about something that is not decidable at all. That is not. I ask a question, that I give you a language and I take a string from that language. I know that that string belongs to this language, but it is not possible even for a Turing machine which is as powerful as this, with the input infinite towards the right. You can rewrite symbols, you can move left, you can move right, and with a Turing machine, it is possible to design to decide everything that is solvable, right? Even computable functions. So there is another class of language that is not even Turing recognizable. So even if W is a member of L, the machine may loop in indecision. It may take a indecision course of working, and it may say that I cannot say whether W is a member of L, but you know deterministic time and with determinism that yes, that determinism of L, then also it cannot say no in deterministic time. It may also look for a solution, right, to this question whether W is a member of L. So all those languages for which checking whether a string is a member of that language or not loop forever are called not Turing recognizable languages. Also, they are called not recursively enumerable, and this middle class is called recursively enumerable, and this decidable class is, as usual we know, is called recursive. So as we know from that language hierarchy, decidable, all context free languages are decidable, all regular languages that are context free are also decidable. I am very happy to recollect some of my old classes where I had shown that recursion is actually the key to definition of these language classes, right? Do you remember? So
Yes, sir.
decidability means uh, given a problem, if you can build a recursive definition for that problem, solvable problems, decidable problems. Okay, that much for today. That much for today. If you have questions, you may ask, but don't bother to ask me questions in the next class. Go through books, try to match up things, try to think what I'm talking about. These are conceptual areas that you should not ignore. Got my point? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Any more Yeah. Any more questions you have? Okay. So have a good day, good evening, and let us meet at 4:30 on Thursday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.